Hello and welcome to episode 50 of the Clacks Women for Independence podcast. The music this week, royalty free as always, is from Blue Thursday, and I thought that was quite appropriate given that this is the anniversary of that Thursday 6 years ago when Scotland wasn't quite ready to say yes. At that time I was working in a team of about a dozen people, and I can't really remember when we became aware of the fact there was going to be a referendum or seriously started talking about it. I think it was only a few months before the actual vote. But I remember over the summer that we all came from a position of, I don't know, what are we going to do? And at that time, there appeared to be three choices. There was yes, no, and Devo Max. And I think if the referendum had been in the summer, and those three options had been on the table, I'm pretty sure that Devo Max is the one that would have won. But then, of course, Cameron took that option away and said, no, it's a straight yes or no. Now, as it happened, one of the members of our team was an SNP councillor. And he didn't start any conversations about independence, but whenever we had questions, he was either happy to answer them or he'd go away and find out the answer and come back and tell us. And that was extremely helpful because I don't recall anybody at any time being in very entrenched positions. There was certainly no ill feeling or all this divisiveness that people talk about. I saw none of that with friends, families, neighbours or at work, none of it. We were just having a conversation and questions were coming up. We were satisfying ourselves as to the answer, or we were asking more questions. In the event, my entire team voted yes. And it wasn't because anybody had encouraged us to, and it actually wasn't because we saw any flags or we went on any marches or anything like that. I wasn't at all politically involved in those days, other than having been a trade union rep in the past. I'd always been a sort of a Labour voter. But it was just through conversation and questions. And I do wonder this time round if we have lost that advantage of everybody being able to consider the question afresh from a blank sheet of paper, because this time round most people have the experience of the previous time round and formed an opinion then. Now, okay, opinions can change, but in the yes movement, sometimes we get too hung up on, what if I don't know all the answers? What if I can't counteract that argument? And actually thinking back again to that experience in 2014, I don't think any of us voted yes because somebody had counteracted our arguments. I think it was just we found answers to the questions and concerns that we had that were satisfying. Which makes me wonder, now that I am a flag-waving marcher myself, whether that's actually more for our own benefit. And although I would be happy if the referendum was tomorrow, I do recognise that people who've recently got onto the yes side, largely as a result of the pandemic and seeing how Nicola Sturgeon has handled it, I'm sure has been a lot to do with it. I also think that looking southward at the rogue state, which has taken over what used to be a democracy, and watching in horror as an overprivileged, unprincipled, lazy clown flaps around in the face of a pandemic whilst trying to break international law, whilst weeks away from crashing over the Brexit cliff edge with no customs in place, no idea what he's going to do with the Irish Sea. So perhaps it's no bad thing that we're not out marching en masse at the moment. Perhaps a nice quiet period of reflection to allow people to make their minds up without feeling pressured. Perhaps that's the right thing. Perhaps that's the best thing for now. I managed to catch up with my friend Marion this week. Marion's a fellow Clacks Women for Indie member, and if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll recognise her voice because she appeared in quite a few of the earlier ones. Not so much the most recent ones, because Marion is also involved in the Women in Parliament project, which has taken up a lot of her free time recently. We managed to get together for an outdoor coffee meet-up and had a bit of a catch-up, which was lovely. course, we were reminiscing on our experiences of 2014, and true to form, Marion prefers to look forwards rather than backwards, so here's what she had to say.
I'm excited about Scottish independence because we'll have the powers to confront the climate emergency and our chronic social inequalities. By investing in Scotland's state-of-the-art marine energy industry, we'll create tens of thousands of skilled jobs, help power our nation and tackle the climate crisis. And our new National Investment Bank will help pay for this green transition. Unlike other banks, it will put all of us first. Now, that's a future I can say yes to.
Oh, well said, Marion. Completely agree with that. We'll hear more from Marion later on in the podcast. Thinking back to some of the campaign slogans from the Better Together side in 2014, the one that always sticks in my mind is "Don't leave the UK, lead it," which was Cameron. Of course, the very next day, he announced legislation, Evil, which would prevent us from ever leading the UK. And of course, Gordon Brown was resurrected for the infamous vow, which they've been trashing ever since. And hard though it is to believe, this week the Tory government at Westminster, fed up with just lies and jobs for the boys and dodgy contracts to pals and being in the pocket of foreign-owned newspapers and being run by unelected bureaucrats with dodgy eyesight and horrific views. This week they decided to become a fully fledged rogue state and to break an international treaty which was less than a year old. It's fair to say that reaction around the globe was shock and horror. Let's start with Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission.
This withdrawal agreement took 3 years to negotiate, and we worked relentlessly on it, line by line, word by word, and together we succeeded. And the result guarantees our citizens' rights, financial interests, the integrity of the single market, and crucially, the Good Friday Agreement. And the European Union and the UK jointly agreed it was the best and only way for ensuring peace on the island of Ireland. And we will never backtrack on that. And this agreement has been ratified by this House and by the House of Commons. It cannot be unilaterally changed, disregarded or disapplied. This is a matter of law and trust and good faith.
And equally unimpressed was our very own Joanna Cherry, who had this to say.
Great consternation is felt in Scotland about the way in which Part 5 of this bill seeks to flout international law by breaking a treaty which the Prime Minister entered freely barely a year ago. There's a long tradition in Scotland going back to the Declaration of Arbroath that neither the monarch nor the government are above the law, and the Prime Minister should really remember that, because it was Scotland's Supreme Court which led the way last year in ruling his prorogation of Parliament unlawful. But it seems the Prime Minister has learnt nothing from that debacle, nor has he learnt anything from the revulsion that was felt when he allowed his adviser Cummings to flout the lockdown restrictions that the rest of us had to obey. And over the last few days, we've watched a succession of Tory government lawyers make mealy-mouthed excuses for what this bill seeks to do. The Lord Chancellor says he will only resign if the government breaks the rule of law in a way in which is unacceptable. What, pray tell, Lord Chancellor, is an acceptable way to break the law? I'm sure the thousands of ordinary men and women who've been fined for breaking lockdown restrictions will be very interested to know the answer to that question. The Attorney General tells us that the English doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty means that she's happy to support this bill, and she cites the case of Miller 1. Seemingly, she's in ignorance that at paragraph 55 of that case, the UK Supreme Court also affirmed that treaties between sovereign states are governed by international law and not by domestic law. If she was capable of applying the most rudimentary legal analysis, she would realise that this means that so far as international law is concerned, the English doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty cannot supersede the UK's freely given agreement and obligations in the withdrawal agreement. And I'm ashamed to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, as a member of the Scottish Bar, that my fellow Scottish advocate, the Tories man in Scotland, the Advocate General, also seems to think it's okay to defend this bill. And I can only assume that he's happy to ignore the fact that in seeking to oust the jurisdiction of the Court of Session in respect of judicial review, Clause 45 of this bill breaches another treaty, the Treaty of Union, of which we've heard much this evening, Article 19 of which protects the supervisory jurisdiction of the Court of Session. So, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister and others have described this bill as a necessary safety net to protect the Union. But if he's looking at the opinion polls in Scotland, including the one that his own government commissioned, or reading the newspapers over the weekend, he will realise that in actual fact, far from protecting the Union, this bill will put a final nail in the Union's coffin.
And Stirling MP Alan Smith gave an excellent summary of everything that's wrong with the bill during his speech proposing the SNP's amendments, which were of course voted down. But I thought it was an excellent speech, so here it is.
This bill is difficult for us. It is offensive to our values, frankly. It's not our worldview, and it's being put forward in pursuit of a project that Scotland comprehensively rejected. We are, however, engaging in good faith, but we do not consent to this project. Scotland does not consent to the way this bill is drafted. But I wasn't sent by the people of Stirling to showboat and then walk away, to grandstand and not try to find solutions. We have put forward Amendments 28 and 29 in good faith, to build in, and it's typical of all of our amendments, to insert into this dreadful piece of legislation the principle of consent of the Scottish Parliament and other devolved administrations. And if we can't do that, then to exempt Scotland from this matter. We are engaging in this process in good faith. We are working within the constitutional reality of the United Kingdom, and if this House proves, in rejecting these amendments, the constitutional reality of the United Kingdom in full view of the people of Scotland doesn't work for us. So as I say, I was sent here to try and find solutions. Amendments 28 and 29 do so. We believe that decisions for Scotland should be made in Scotland.
Hear, hear.
It's a fundamental principle of devolution that unless reserved to this place, decisions should be made by the democratically elected Parliament of Scotland. That principle was endorsed by the people of Scotland with 74% of the vote in 1997. For the members opposite who are keen on referendums, they really should be aware that they are upending a deeply held principle of the people of Scotland. So this bill, as I have said, is a poor piece of legislation, and it didn't need to be this way, and this is where I find this so frustrating and so offensive morally, politically, even intellectually. It didn't need to be this way. We are open to negotiation, we are open to frameworks. We respect the fact that we have left the European Union. I regret it deeply, we regret it deeply, but it has happened. I accept as a solicitor to trade myself that there needs to be a domestic legal construct to replace the single market legislation of the European Union. But it doesn't need to be this abomination. We could do this better. Our amendments seek to make this bad bill better. We'll still not be keen on it, we'll still not be in favour of it, but it doesn't need to be the naked power grab that it is. On the generality of Part 4, Sir Graham, Part 4 seeks to replace 60 years of jurisprudence of the European Court of Justice, the European Commission, democratically overseen by the democratically elected members of the European Parliament, and the member state governments, themselves democratically elected. 60 years of expertise on how the single market and internal competition works. Oh, please.
Just to clarify on that point, it's actually the European Commission that oversees the single market, and it's the European Commission, which is an unelected body, which does oversee and creates the market frameworks. So
I do thank the member for that point. As in my 15 years in the European Parliament, I was always struck by how many unelected bureaucrats had been democratically elected by the people that they serve. But it's great to engage with something that doesn't quite exist, but the European Commission she wishes did. And for people who are against unelected bureaucrats, I can only suggest they have a look at the reality of this bill. What this bill does is replace the 60 years of jurisprudence overseen by the experts in the European Commission, the experts in the Court of Justice, the democratically elected MEPs, the democratically elected member state governments, by a group of people who will themselves be unelected. They will be appointed, but they've not been appointed yet. We don't know who they are. They'll be operating a competition policy which has not as yet been revealed by this government that's so desperately negotiating with itself it can't actually tell our European partners what it's trying to do. And these people will be operating with a budget that hasn't yet been shown to us and a jurisprudence that doesn't yet exist. It takes a heroically Panglossian approach to all of this to think that that can be created in a matter of months. This chimera, this shibboleth that's going to be created by this bill, and I've already explained the reality of how devolution works. Unless reserved to this place, decisions should be made in Scotland. This shibboleth, with people not yet appointed, operating to a policy not yet decided, to a budget that hasn't been agreed, with a jurisprudence that doesn't exist, will sit above, as a politically appointed death panel, every single decision of every single public authority in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and indeed England. Every decision involving public expenditure will be gainsaid by this unelected quango that doesn't yet exist and we don't know what it is. So from our perspective, it is replacing a system that we are comfortable with. We respect the fact we've left the European Union. We don't like it, but we have. But a system that works tolerably well is going to be replaced with a system that doesn't exist and is politically motivated, ideologically driven, and owes nothing to the creation of jobs or safeguarding of jobs or standards. It is entirely a political project to get as much power to this place as possible against the objections of the Senate in Wales on that point, sir.
We'll give way. And does he suspect, as I do, that perhaps some appointed to this unelected body might be more of the chums that we've seen of the Prime Minister in the likes of Tony Abbott? You know, disgraced former Prime Minister of Australia, political appointment, totally unsuitable for the role, yet appointed to that because he shares the same political views as the Prime Minister.
Very grateful for the point and very strongly agree. We don't know who these people are going to be. We don't know how they're going to be appointed. And forgive me, from the track record of the government thus far, I have little faith in who they're going to be and what their agenda is actually going to be in practice. So our concern is about the lack of power that the people of Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, and indeed England, will have over that process. And indeed this Parliament. The oversight that this Parliament will have over this process under the very text of this bill, which is a wider discussion than these amendments, Sir Graham, is appalling. So it didn't need to be this way. And we've heard opposite from some of the members today earlier in the debate that there should be uniform standards across the UK. It's a superficially appealing point as superficial arguments go, which seems to be what the members opposite deal in. But the single market within the European Union operates very successfully with different standards. And the whole point of devolution is that different places are empowered to make different decisions. So there may well be different standards, different practices, different expectations, different rules in different parts of the four home nations. That's the point. This bill is a mechanism, a political mechanism, to override and destroy that democratic diversity and replace it with devolution as power retained. It is a naked power grab for all to see. And I would urge people outside this House, Sir Graham, to read this bill carefully, because it makes the case for independence for Scotland all the stronger. We are comfortable. Please.
Talking about standards, the British should be very proud of their standards in animal welfare and particularly in farming. I certainly am from our Cornish farmers, and we've done that whilst we've been part of the European Union, and our standards are higher than many of our counterparts in the European Union. Having a single internal market does not mean that we will lower standards in anything. We can learn from each other and keep our higher standards in all parts of the United Kingdom.
It does. Well, in which case I do hope the Honourable Lady is going to supporting our amendment, which makes clear on the explicit face of the bill that there will be no cutting of standards, which is not under consideration today, Sir Graham, but it is there in black and white. And it was curious to see Conservative members refuse to support the previous reasoned amendment from my former MEP colleague who put forward precisely that in a previous piece of legislation, and it was rejected.
Exactly.
Because this is a government that is so desperate not to tie its hands with such considerations as lowering standards, because that may well be what needs to be traded away in future trade deals. We are deeply concerned on behalf of Scotland's farmers, and indeed everybody else's, that trade deals could see a lowering of standards, that mutual recognition of the UK internal market could undermine the capacity of the different authorities to have those rules. Please.
I thank him for giving me on that. And on that concern about the lowering of standards, previously the International Trade Secretary said consumers will choose, it'll be up to consumers to choose what products they want to shelves. Does that in itself not indicate a Trojan horse for a lowering of standards that would affect Scottish farming?
Exactly that. Fully agree with the gentleman who's been fighting for farmers in his constituency for many years. The new clause 5, which I hope we do have some support from the opposition benches on, is specifically about the maintenance of minimum standards. So I hope when the House comes to consider that, there will be support. Because if we are scaremongering about lowering standards, it's on the amendments. Those amendments can be supported to make explicit in this bill that there will not be. Prove us wrong. By refusing to back the amendment, we will be proven right. I take the point, Sir Graham, that the gentleman makes, and he accuses me of promoting the case for independence, and indeed I do promote the case for independence. But the members opposite really do need to be in no doubt. There is a substantial element of the population of Scotland deeply disgusted by this process. Frustrated by the disrespect that Scotland has been shown. Since the EU referendum, where we rejected Brexit significantly, but were told to shut up and get back in our box. Just after the 2014 referendum, where we've been told we were a partnership of equals. But we were then told, immediately afterwards, we are part of the United Kingdom, not a partner in it. This bill makes that explicit in the eyes of the people of Scotland. And I won Stirling from the party opposite with 51% of the vote, precisely because I am actually in favour of the rule of law. I am actually in favour of international solidarity as demonstrated by the multilateral binding voluntary solidarity of the European Union. That is a structure we're comfortable with. That is a structure that we're very comfortable with Scotland fitting into in future. Dare I say, Scotland has a far sharper sense of its place in the world than the UK does right now. And this bill seeks to cement power in the hands of the unelected, aided and abetted by people who, with good intentions, I don't doubt, are facilitating that power grab. But in so doing, upending the principle of devolution that is dear to the hearts of the people of Scotland, Wales, and deeply sensitive in Northern Ireland. So when the gentleman says I'm promoting the cause of independence, damn right I am. I'm also defending constitutional probity and the rule of law within the United Kingdom. And perhaps the members opposite need to think a little bit harder about what they're being whipped through the lobbies to support. So our amendments, Sir Graham, to conclude, in good faith, we seek to insert into this package, which we dislike so much, the principle of consent of the Scottish Parliament and the devolved administrations, failing which we seek to exempt Scotland from this madness. I urge members to support the rule of law and democracy within these islands.
So from the goings-on at Westminster and in the European Parliament, down to much more local issues, especially if you live in Clackmannanshire. As I said earlier, Marion and I met up for coffee this week, and the prompt for us to do that, we wanted to support the new bus service that has just been put in, directly as a result of pressure from the community. Well, we've just been on the bus, which was a lifeline for Muckert.
Yeah, and we lost our lifeline from Muckert and Dollar because the bus operator, Stagecoach, decided just to withdraw it without any notice to any of the local people or any of the passengers. It just withdrew it. And so Stagecoach were the original operator, and they just stopped it at the beginning of the COVID outbreak and the lockdown at the end of March, basically. So it just got withdrawn. People weren't notified, and they were stuck. So even essential workers couldn't get to work. If they didn't have a car and they lived rurally or along this route that they normally used, they wouldn't be able to get to hospitals or fire stations or
food.
People who are working in the supermarkets, all the things we now hugely rely on and took for granted.
Yes.
And they were all kind of stranded. So people like that must have really struggled to feel supported through this process. And then we decided to kind of fight back. The community decided that it was worth making a bit of a stand and a protest about. So Mark Ruskell, our Green MSP for Mid-Scotland and Fife.
Tractor going past there.
Yeah,
that's how rural we are.
This is it. Yeah. Mark Ruskell, MSP, started a petition. So it was a letter writing petition on behalf of all the people along the old number 23 bus route to see if we could get some traction and for them to change their mind about withdrawing it permanently, because it looked as if it was going to be something that would last, forever, and there would be no comeback if we didn't do something there and then. So the petition went out. The community councils, the Community Development Trust in Dollar, they all signed up to it. They put it on their websites, and people rallied round, and 700 local people and organisations got in touch with Stagecoach East about the withdrawal on that particular route. So there was a bit of a consultation, and letters came back saying that it looked as if they were going to be able to work with Clackmannshire Council to find another operator, and that's when in stepped First Bus, and they are now our bus operator, and thank God for it.
3 cheers for First Bus.
Yeah.
That was my first time on the bus this morning, just coming through to Tilly from Dollar. No problems distancing, and everybody gives you a smile, in as much as you can tell if they're smiling through a mask.
So you do feel quite safe. We've got our hand gel with us. We're wearing our masks. And the guys we visor.
And the seats are all marked out to keep you spaced. It's good, and a beautiful clean bus, and it arrived on time. You can't say better than that.
No, exactly. And we've got it back too early now, which is a bit of a icing on the cake in a way, because it was 3 early.
It was 3 early, so that's an improvement.
So we're now kind of quids in and 1 up actually. So the withdrawal has made us do is this business of waking up to reality, and the communities have decided to try to get a bus users group together.
Good.
Through the auspices of Mark Ruskell, and we're hoping to set up a meeting with First Bus in the next couple of weeks hopefully, and find out if there's a way that we can actually work together to make sure that the route is promoted, and that we get as many folk as possible on that bus to make it valid, for the future.
Excellent. Well, do you know what a great example of communities working together for their own benefit, and even tiny places like Dollar and Muckert. I mean, there's 3,000 people in Dollar, less than that in Muckert, and yet they've managed to make a difference just by targeted campaign.
Exactly.
And just a bit of information for anybody listening to this. I turned 60 in April, and when I looked into getting my bus pass, they weren't producing them because of the COVID shutdown. So I just checked again this week because we were coming on the bus, and the website's now open again, and you can go and apply, but you have to go to the community access point with a piece of paper and a photograph, which seems very, very low-tech way of doing it, when you can get a rail equivalent card just by putting a photo, uploading it online, and you get a card sent to you. However, I'm not going to complain because at the end of the day they are still they've started making them again, so I'm going to go in and get one.
This one here, and it should be more automated than it sounds like it is. It's a national scheme.
Yeah, it should
so
be.
It should be like the rail, as you say.
Yeah, but anyway, we'll take the small victories where we find them.
Count our blessings.
So.
And for anybody living in, Glasgow or Edinburgh,
Yes, we are pleased because our bus service has been improved to every 2 hours. Now, I think I might have mentioned on this podcast before that in Tillicoultry, the tree right in the centre of Tillicoultry at the bus station has been covered with pom-poms by local children. But this was the first time Marion had seen this tree, so here's what she thought of it. This is the centre of Tillicoultry, isn't it?
Yeah, there's kind of bus stands.
Very distinctive clock that we have in Tilly. So this is what the community have done. I suppose to give the children, it was in the original lockdown when you were only allowed an hour a day, they started doing this. So it's probably just giving them something to do. But it's really become
It's
quite
very colourful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And creative.
So what do you think about the way communities have responded to?
Well, lots of communities have taken up the banner of trying to be more connected with each other, I suppose, connected with not just human life but also nature. So I think it's been like a wake-up call for people. They've had to find it in themselves to break out of their little silos and to try to hook up with nature and other people to help them out. And Muckert was no different. There was a helping hand scheme there where local folk got together and made sure that folk who needed the prescriptions picked up or their messages taken to their door if they were shielding, all of that was done locally, and the village really responded very positively, as a lot of villages and towns and cities across the country did. So it's really heartening, and it's that kind of can-do spirit, isn't it, that's come to the fore, and that's been like another sign of hope.
Yes.
You know, the kids have got their own way of expressing hope, and here we have the pom-pom tree.
Well, and I suppose they probably spent a fair bit of time making the pom-poms, so you could imagine some fairly desperate housebound parents thinking, what can we get them to do now?
Yeah.
I know, pom-poms.
So I think it also shows a bit of resilience. You know, we talk about lack of resilience, but kids will learn to be more resilient if they're shown the way by the folks around them. So they've gone and done that, haven't they?
Do you know, when you think about it, this is the generation that will create an independent Scotland. But, you know, this generation have been through this experience of COVID and that community importance and the resilience and the importance of key workers who are not necessarily the people you would have thought should be valued.
So visible all the time.
All the carers, all the bus drivers, the people who work in supermarkets. And you just wonder how valuable a lesson that's going to be going into creating a new country, and the importance of what you can do locally and taking responsibility, and that keeping the democracy very local and very small scale.
When you look at the under 35s, between 16 and 35, those that can vote in the Scottish elections, and they are 75% of them are pro-independence, and it's very practical, as much as anything, isn't it? We like to try to do things locally, we like to express ourselves locally. People that live in Tillicoultry, Dollar, Muckert and Clackmannishire generally, they know what their communities need, and so if by taking our future into our own hands, as these kids have done, we can knit ourselves, crochet ourselves, pom-pom ourselves into a new world.
Create a tree of hope.
That's right. So yes, let's hear it for the kids and for their parents who've had to put up with a hell of a lot these last several months. Hey, it's been really hard and tough, and some people have lost loved ones in this process.
The other thing,
which is what our First Minister always says every time she stands up at the podium. And I think that cuts through to people too, doesn't it?
Yes, that's
it shows the humanity of our leaders and the way we want to live. It's a great example for kids to grow up with, isn't it? So
if anybody is interested in seeing what the Tillicoultry pom-pom tree looks like, I've put a little bit of film footage of it in the Clacks Wi-Fi playlist on the Independence Live YouTube channel. But we still weren't finished putting the world to rights.
There was a week of the front page Daily Record or something, and it was the 6 Scottish Tories, and they were saying these guys have just voted to destroy Hollywood because they have. And somebody had made the comment, another woman among them, and you looked at them and it was 6 men, cut and paste men, and the rat-faced linesman was the youngest, but
I don't know how they can live
pale
with
stale
themselves.
males, you know, all white, all men.
And that Alexander Stewart, you know, you think it's bound to kind of occur to people when they get Alexander Stewart coming through their door with the same uniform message, banners of red, white and blue around it, and he's the only man, bar one sort of woman half out of shot in the whole thing. Everything is male. People are bound to waking up to that's old. It's not us.
If you're a woman, if you've got any kind of different background, I mean, they're all white faces, they're all able-bodied white men in their 40s and 50s, and that tiny narrow perspective, and I'll add rich able-bodied white men.
Yeah, and that
tiny that tiny perspective is all they're bringing to everything they do. So no wonder everybody who's not in that group feels excluded, because they are excluded, because they have no idea what your life's like, what my life's like, what anybody else's life's like, because they live in this rarefied little bubble, and it's reinforced by every single person they meet, because they're only meeting people like them. It's a classic reason why diversity is important. Well, that was spoken like a true HR professional, wasn't it?
And I remember in my last conversation with my boss at the time, he was a nice enough guy, but I knew I wasn't well. In my head, I didn't feel good. I just missed my family. I was doing so many hours overtime, and when I was at home, my brain wasn't at home. And he looked at me when he was talking about this next project we were going to do. There's a couple of other people in the room, and he looked across at me, and I was obviously just tuned right out. And he said to me afterwards, "You're not motivated by money, are you?"
It doesn't make you happy, because the ones that are the most greedy are the ones who already have the most. So they're trying to fill some black pit in their soul that they're not going to be able to fill. Well, look at Rees-Mogg. When you look behind who's driven the entire Brexity madness, it's been people with money at the back of it, whether it's newspaper owners, or politicians, or financiers, or whatever. That's who's behind it. And if you're not one of them, then you're working for one of them, like Cummings and Johnson and Farage and everybody else. It is just the collapse of society due to some small people's greed.
And it's so obvious. No, that's what I think is out in the open right now. It's just how callously brazen and transparent it all is, and they don't care whether you know it or not. It's the way that they've always operated. They're entitled to do that, and they're jolly well going to make even more money now. I think that's part of the mindset, isn't it? When you're a person that kind of is avaricious that way, and you want more and more, it just becomes like a disease.
But it's so sad, isn't it? Because even if they do get it, it's not going to make them any nicer a person, or happier, or have better quality friendships. It's not going to give them anything valuable. It's just toss another balloon on the pile.
So many people hate you.
Exactly.
I mean, really,
and
you and I would just feel like
people.
Yikes.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine being so loathed by so many people.
Yeah.
Being able to live with that.
Having done so much damage to
and
so
he
many
goes
people.
To church.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
Well, he's your in your face, religious type, anything that can be twisted to justify their own ends.
Agenda.
You know?
Yeah.
Whether you can do it as a geneticist, or a racial purity, or all the other things that have been used to justify. I was reading somewhere that is often the sign of something that's just about to fall apart. You know, they've got to the point where they're not even trying to hide it anymore, and it's just like it's like the Berlin Wall coming down. You know, these people try and maintain the sort of illusion that everything's fine, even though it's bloody obvious to everybody that it isn't. And then when the end happens, it's in days, it's quick.
And it's also a kind of an indication of the mentality of these people, that's the way that they plan to go on until the bitter end. It's like you notice that with certainly the very extreme, the more right-wing part of the Tory party, which is they want to not just dominate, but if they can't dominate, they'll utterly destroy you. I think we said that before. And they don't care if they actually make themselves look like nihilists.
Or destroy the very country whose flag they're draping on everything. You know, they're badge themselves as being the patriots in all this, and they are destroying their own country to make themselves richer. I mean, that people giving secrets to the Russians in the Cold War did less than that, you know.
Beyond shameful.
It is, it really is astonishing.
What has happened in such a relatively short time.
But the scary thing, and this maybe gets us back to your point actually, after a long detour around other things. If you are so divorced from normal life because you're sitting at the pinnacle of this very rarefied world where they have yachts and they meet on their tax havens and all this, and you start to think that the rules don't apply to you, which is why they have, you know, underage girls provided for the benefit of princes, that's a million miles away from local community accountability. And much as you might look at some of the councillors in our respective villages and think, are you really the best person for the job? They have put themselves forward. But locally, you can get rid of them, you vote for somebody else. And, you know, at the end of the day, they're still part of your community, and they still live in your community, and they still know your community. And if we end up with local councils that are full of 60-year-old white men, that's our fault for not putting ourselves forward for the council. It's not that anybody's stopping us.
No.
A couple of episodes ago, I mentioned that the Citizens' Assembly appeared to be getting ready to start up again, and it in fact did. Weekend 5 took place on the 5th of September. It was done as a virtual Citizens' Assembly, and the outputs from that are on the citizensassembly.scot website if you want to have a look at them. I've dropped one of them into the Clacks WFI playlist on the Indie Live Radio YouTube because I thought it was quite a good summary of some of the inputs, which were various experts saying what impact they thought COVID had had on the way forward. I'm just going to play a little clip now from that in terms of some of the impacts, and I was particularly interested in some of the summaries of things that are happening in other countries. So here we are. This is from the Citizens' Assembly, 5th of September.
Building a sustainable country is at the heart of what the Assembly has discussed. But how will this be affected by COVID? Some people are worried that economic pressures will lead to a dirty recovery in some business practices across the world, and that public attention and critical resources could be diverted from addressing the climate crisis to dealing with coronavirus. Green campaigners have been busy drawing together the case for resetting the economy along sustainable lines, and some countries have started to introduce measures which support the green recovery. For example, Finland and Canada have made their support for businesses in the pandemic dependent on upholding environmental responsibilities. Norway has taken action on green export initiatives and the shifting away from fossil fuel reliance and subsidy. In Scotland, the Parliament's Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee are leading a discussion on establishing the principles, actions, priority and the arrangements that should underpin an effective green recovery.
One of the other aspects that I think is really heartening is the discussion around conditionality on businesses receiving government support and bailouts. It's perhaps not as vigorous as we'd like, but things like the Scottish Parliament voting to not give business support to companies that are linked to tax havens. We've got the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, saying that any company receiving a government bailout should demonstrate its plan to reach the Paris target. So that is a huge precedent that we should ask more of businesses that are getting basically public sector taxpayers' support. I think that's a really great trend that we should keep going beyond COVID.
How has the Scottish Government responded to the challenge for Scotland to recover and renew from the pandemic? It set up 3 independent advisory groups to look at economic recovery, enterprise and skills, and social renewal. In response to the first 2 groups, it has produced an economic recovery plan which brings equality and human rights principles into decision-making and takes a partnership approach to building a well-being economy. The plan commits the government to supporting businesses and young people, good quality jobs, green growth, and a just transition through investment-led sustainable growth. There are also plans to revise the climate change plan as part of the green recovery.
The Advisory Group on Economic Recovery which I chaired, reached a number of conclusions. One was that the dominant themes we face in recovering from this COVID crisis will be inequality, employment and education. And the particular group which is most vulnerable are the young people who are in the mid-teens to the mid-20s. We need to come up with big ideas to protect and shelter that group. They don't deserve a future that could be scarred indefinitely. One idea that we came up with within the group was the Scottish Job Guarantee Scheme, which I'm delighted to say is moving forward with gusto. But we need more ideas. This needs to be an education-led recovery, and education is the secret to solving inequality, and education and training will serve us well in tackling the inevitable levels of unemployment that we face.
My big idea is that the relationship between the state and citizens can be reset. What I mean by this is that there's an opportunity now to shift to a model where the state supports people and communities to do things for themselves, and we call this the enabling state. We've seen it in operation during the pandemic, where in the best examples, governments and communities have worked together and played to their respective strengths. Government has done what only it can do, and communities, neighbourhoods and family groups have supported each other in the places that the state doesn't really know how to reach. This is really important because we know that aspects of our well-being can best be improved through local interactions within our families and our communities. If we don't harness the capacity and the energy for mutual aid and to make things happen at local level, this isn't a gap that either central or local government is capable of filling. We argue that people should be let into the design and development of policies that affect them and supported to participate. We need to study what made it possible for people to help and support each other in this extraordinary year and remove any barriers that get in the way of this happening in normal time.
One of the things we saw early in the COVID experience was the extent to which the governments had to work together in some ways around the emergency legislation, and that was partly because of the things that the Scottish Parliament couldn't do, things around employment, for example. So the furlough scheme that we've heard lots about was a policy of the UK government, and it could only have ever been a policy of the UK government because they were the ones that had the powers and control over that. Likewise, going forward, the economic recovery, there are bits and pieces that the Scottish Government can do, but most of that will be financed by borrowing, and the Scottish Parliament doesn't have a lot, has some borrowing powers, but it doesn't have a lot of borrowing powers. So again, there will be a need for the UK Government to step in, and one would hope for the governments to work together on some of the policy challenges going forward. So COVID, I think, illustrated some of the many powers that the Scottish Parliament has, but it also served to illustrate those that it doesn't have. And I think that's something to bear in mind when you think about the priorities going forward.
And finally, here is the wonderful Angus Brendan MacNeill giving Bozo a real doing. And I have removed some of the PM's worst witterings, but you'll get the idea.
Well, when will you agree to the Scottish Government's request for a Section 30? Will you ever agree to the Scottish Government's request for a Section 30 to hold an independence referendum?
The Scottish Nationalist Party...
It's Scottish Government.
Once in a
not at all. That was not written in the Edinburgh Agreement.
Oh, that was.
You said you died.
They voted, and I think we
yes or no?
Yes, I think we.
So that, is that a no? Is that a no? Is that a yes or a no? So it's a no to a Section 30, regardless of the wishes of the Scottish people. And the polls said very clearly shown independence.
In 20, this was a once in
that was not said. That was not said clearly. That's not in the Edinburgh Agreement.
I mean, it is ironic that Bozo thinks it's a legitimate reason not to have another referendum is an off-the-cuff remark said by somebody in the course of a TV interview. Let's just remind ourselves that not only did Bozo describe the 2019 election as once in a generation, he's also prepared to break international law. And all the irony meters on the planet have just exploded. So on that happy note, that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. Catch you later. Bye now.